What up, fish friends? My name's Michael. Today we're going to be going over this setup for this 75-gallon or 4-foot long planted aquarium. I've set this tank up in an office, Highland Development Services, and their logo features 2 mountain peaks, Longs and Meeker, which are reflected in the back of this aquarium. Jason, who owns this business, is a big mountain man, and that was the one thing besides the forest that he really wanted in this aquarium. Let's get going. Anytime I'm starting off with a new aquarium, I give it a quick rinse out. No point in using soap because the whole reason I'm cleaning it out is to get rid of chemicals from the factory. Alright, so I know I'm using a couple large pieces of granite in here, and granite's got a lot of pointy edges. So I'm using this styrofoam along the bottom where I'm going to be putting those large granite rocks. And since you've already seen the final outcome for this tank, you know that it's got to slope up towards the back. That's the only way to do a forested and mountain tank. So instead of dropping a ton of money on soil, I'm using this lava rock. It's pretty cheap from Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever your local hardware store is. It's made for gas grills. You just want to give it a really solid rinse off. So besides saving money, another advantage to using this lava rock is that it's great for beneficial bacteria and other microbial life that can colonize the extremely porous surfaces. And even the roots will get in between the nooks and crannies, especially as I'm pouring in soil and it fills the gaps in between the lava rock. So here we go, dumping in a bunch of soil. You can see, like, I would have spent a ton of money using that much soil. Instead of the 4 bags I think I used in here, it probably would have been close to like 9 or 10, maybe even more. And then I'd like to get these mountain peaks as close to the top, so I'm adding a block of styrofoam, which was actually a really stupid idea. So the whole point of this design where the rocks aren't glued into place is so that I can pull these mountain peaks out and give them a scrub down. So looking back at this tank, which is kind of the inspiration for setting up the current tank I'm setting up, as cool as this tank was, one of the biggest annoyances was that it was hard to really scrub these rocks. So you can get in there with a brush. I did silicone all these mountain peaks in place, but the small ones in particular don't stand a chance against the pressure of me trying to scrub blackbeard or green spot algae off. So, you know, the whole idea was to have these mountain peaks removable, and looking back on it, after removing one of them to clean it, the weight wasn't enough that this styrofoam pad came shooting up, making a huge mess in this tank. So learn a lesson from me and don't do that. Just use other sinkable materials whenever you're trying to build some height in a tank. Now the styrofoam over on this other section, completely fine, because I know that I'm never going to be pulling out these chunks. It's just the ones that will be out in the open right next to the light that will accumulate algae. Okay, now keep going. I want to add a lot of smaller chunks of granite because that will really help to build some detail, and I will add larger chunks towards the front left and smaller ones towards the back right as we get towards the mountains. The whole idea of that is that it helps to create a sense of scale. So if you have 2 10-foot rocks and one of them is right next to you, it's going to look pretty large. But if the other one's like, 600 feet away or something, it's going to look a lot smaller. So we can use that knowledge to build a little depth in the tank. And I'm doing the same thing with these tree trunks. As we get further away, they get smaller and smaller. If someone were creating a painting, that's how they would do it. Obviously, it's a little harder in a fish tank to create like a perfect diorama where we're like, oh yeah, that's exactly like the picture of a mountains or something. Yeah, especially when I'm setting up a tank for someone's business, you know, I can't be messing with this hardscape for the course of 3 weeks. They'll want this tank set up relatively quickly. Okay, so as cool as this front area was with this fallen tree, I think it would actually look nicer to have a sand bed in here. So I'm gonna pull a bunch of the soil from this little corner and silicone some rocks in, add some foam pads underneath and in little gaps so that the soil won't fall forward onto the sand bed. And you know, keep going around siliconing little gaps. It just helps to create some more stability in the tank, and in spots where it's important, where I don't want soil falling into the sand, it'll also help keep that back. The more little rocks I add and little branches here and there, the more detail I'm putting into this tank, the more exciting it will be to look at. If you want to take like an extreme example, if you just had a tank with one rock in it and one type of plant, it would get kind of boring. So it's up to you to decide how much detail you want, but the idea in my head was that the sand bed here is just another area of detail and something different for you to look at, which is kind of how a natural landscape is, right? You might be looking at a mountain from the distance and seeing that, well, it looks like just one forest and a bunch of mountains. But then when you start hiking up into it, you notice, oh, there's some mud holes and clay spots and sandy areas, burned out ridges, and it's not just one type of vegetation and one type of rock. There's all sorts of different stuff. And so one of the cool things is that I actually collected all of these rocks and branches, minus the Sirius stone in the corner, but I collected them while I was hiking out in nature, the same mountains that Jason wanted this tank to resemble. So it's going to give it a really natural, cool looking vibe. All right, time to get some plants in. One way to like kind of help me organize in my head where the plants are going is just to lay them out. If they're in bags, it's safe to put them out because they won't dehydrate. But for the stuff that isn't bagged, you'll need to spritz it down with a spray bottle every now and then. Same as the plants that you start putting in the soil, you'll want to spritz it down with some water to keep them from drying out, because after all, they are aquatic plants. Alright, nothing too crazy here. I'm just going through and grabbing the plants with some forceps and sticking them in the soil like I've done in every other build video. Something to think about again in terms of scale is that broader leaves look nicer in the front of the tank, and then we want to have really fine leaves kind of out in the distance so that they all blend together. Think about, again, looking at like some mountains in the distance. You're not going to notice every single plant out there. From a distance, they all just look like one green blob. But from where you're standing, you'll notice fine blades of grass right next to you. So it's important to try and create that detail up in the front and then get lost in the infinite expanse of tiny little leaves that all blend together in the distance. All right, it's been many, many months and things have grown in. Okay, let's talk about equipment a bit. I'm not going to beat this to death because I already have videos kind of outlining how all this equipment works. But just a quick rundown, there is a Oase Biomaster running in here. So I usually aim to shoot for about 5 times the total tank turnover volume per hour. For a tank like this, a lot of people would push that towards 10. But I don't like to blast the fish that much, especially when you got a lot of young, smaller fish. the flow, like a really strong flow, can push them to their limits. Like they're constantly swimming against the flow, and it burns a lot of energy, and essentially it just kind of tires them out. And then there is a auto dosing system on here. It's a jet cod or jebao, pretty affordable little system. And then I have it plumbed with some APT3 and CChem XL. The XL is something that I primarily use in the early stages of a setup when it's more prone to algae outbreaks. At this point, I'm not even using it anymore. I just have it in there in case there's ever like a kind of emergency algae situation where I need to switch it on for a little bit and then turn it back off when it's resolved. Then we are using CO2 on this tank. I'm embarrassed to say there was a problem with the CO2 initially where basically the pressure wasn't building up properly and causing the inline diffuser to work well. And so the CO2 was constantly not going on in the beginning, and eventually it started to work better. But then what happened was one day there was a buildup of pressure in the diffuser, and I kept increasing the CO2 levels, and it didn't change the amount of bubbles per second that was coming out of the bubble counter. After realizing that jacking the CO2 all the way up didn't result in any increased bubbles per second, figured there was something wrong with it, so I lowered it all the way down to 0 and just turned it up a scotch. Making any sort of judgment on what kind of CO2 you're putting in without seeing the bubbles per second is a big mistake. I thought that I had set it properly. Unfortunately, the next day the CO2 just unloaded in the tank and there was no one in this office, and it resulted in all of the fish and shrimp dying. Literally one snail survived this, so I feel really, really horrible. And the lesson that I take from this is that if you have any sort of malfunction in your CO2 equipment, you should just scrap it and replace it with one that works. You know, obviously there is some tinkering involved with any equipment for an aquarium, but I could tell that there was a little bit of problem with that in the beginning, and I should have just replaced it. So from here on out, if I ever experience issues, malfunctions with CO2 equipment from the get-go, just return it. It's free returns and replacements. That was really a bad judgment on my part and a horrible mistake because it led to all these critters dying unnecessarily. All right, the last piece of equipment we got on here are the lights. They're a couple 48-inch strips, Finex lights. I don't have them set all the way to their maximum intensity because they are fairly powerful, but because they're such a thin strip, it's important to have 2 on here. That way it casts light in the front of the tank and the back of the tank. All right, let's talk about livestock. There's about 30 cardinal tetra in here and a dozen celestial pearl danios. The celestial pearls are one of the most fun fish. Tiny little guys, but they're super active. Just like any danio, they're always going around back and forth, jittering with each other, doing their little mating dances. I mean, you can see them just like constantly going back and forth. Such a fun fish. They are pretty young right now. They'll pick up a lot more color. Those spots will be more pronounced. The red markings on the fins and kind of that bronze mohawk for the males will really pop as they get older. And kind of the same deal with the cardinals. It's a young batch of cardinals. They will really grow quite a bit, maybe about quadruple in size, pick up a lot more red color underneath. And then there's some cherry shrimp in here. One more fish that will probably be added is the yellow gourami. Well, thanks so much for watching, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. I sincerely appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. If you did enjoy it, please support my channel by hitting that like or subscribe button, leaving a comment saying you enjoyed it, or watching some other videos. I put a lot of effort and time into my channel and appreciate you supporting it. Until next time, see ya!